The lie was a beautiful one, and Adrian had worn it for nearly a century. It was the guise of an earnest, slightly awkward history major named Adrian Vance, a young man perpetually fascinated by the fall of empires he had personally witnessed. The lie lived in the worn tweed of his jacket, the scent of old paper that clung to him, and the way he would push his glasses up his nose, a gesture he'd practiced in a mirror until it felt like a reflex. But the most beautiful, and therefore most dangerous part of the lie, was Maya. She was his lab partner in historiography and ancient texts, a collaboration born of alphabetical seating charts and sealed by a shared, quiet reverence for the past. She had secured a research assistantship with Professor Albright, which granted her after-hours access to the restricted collections, and had added Adrian to her project proposal as a co-researcher. Tonight, the university's archival library was their sanctuary, a cavern of silent, towering shelves under the buttery glow of green-shaded lamps. He watched her across the polished oak table, the lamplight catching the warm, brown undertones of her dark hair as she leaned over a fragile manuscript. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lower lip caught between her teeth. It was a look of such profound, unguarded focus that it made his unbeating heart ache with a terrifying tenderness. "It's the subscript," she murmured, not looking up. "The scribe is using a different ink for the annotations. See, it's faded to a lighter sepia. He was adding his own thoughts later, maybe years later." Adrian leaned closer, forcing himself to be human clumsy, his shoulder brushing hers. He inhaled her scent, clean soap, the faint, sweet perfume of her shampoo, and the unique, irreplaceable fragrance of her skin. It was a scent of life so vibrant it was a physical pain to be near. "You're right," he said, his voice a low murmur. "He's correcting the main text. Look, he's arguing with a ghost." Maya finally looked up, her dark eyes wide and luminous. She smiled, a small, brilliant thing that seemed to pull all the warmth in the room toward her. "I like that, arguing with a ghost." Her gaze lingered on his face, and for a moment, the academic pretense fell away. In that space, there was only the quiet hum of connection that had been building between them all semester, a current as undeniable and dangerous as gravity. It was in that shimmering silence that Adrian felt it, a change in the atmosphere, a faint, discordant scent on the air that cut through the comforting aroma of old books. It smelled of grave dirt, of blood spilled in rage, and of the profound, unholy stillness of the long dead. A rogue. Here. His entire being went rigid. The human disguise evaporated in an instant, leaving only the ancient king, the sentinel. The scent was old, familiar, a scent he hadn't encountered in over 200 years. Silas. A butcher, a creature of pure, nihilistic impulse, one of the few he had failed to bring to heel or destroy in the brutal wars that had consolidated his long reign. Silas, who delighted in torment, who saw love not as a virtue, but as a vulnerability to be exploited and torn apart. Maya shifted beside him. "Adrian? You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He forced his muscles to relax, a monumental act of will. "Just thinking," he lied, his mind racing, spiraling into a cold, black panic. Silas was a hunter of kings. He would not be here by chance. He would be hunting him. And a hunter never strikes at the strongest point. He circles. He watches. He identifies the softest, most vulnerable part of his prey and sinks his teeth in there. Adrian looked at Maya, at the trusting warmth in her eyes, and he saw a target. The single, most precious, and most indefensible part of his carefully constructed life. He had to protect her, and the only way to protect her from a monster like Silas was to make her utterly, completely, and irrevocably unimportant. He had to make the hunter believe she was nothing to him. He had to destroy the most beautiful thing he had ever known to save it. The decision settled over him, as heavy and as final as a shroud. He arranged the meeting for the following evening at a small, perpetually crowded coffee shop near the campus edge. The location was deliberate. Silas wouldn't just watch them once. He would watch the aftermath. He would see her friends comfort her, see Adrian ignore her in the hallways, see the human social fabric confirm his lie 1,000 times over. Multiple people would hear the breakup. Gossip would spread. A single performance wasn't enough. He needed to create a reality Silas could observe from every angle. When Maya arrived, her face was lit with a smile that twisted the knife already in his gut. She was wearing a soft, gray sweater he'd once told her he liked. "Hey," she said, her voice warm as she slid into the booth opposite him. "Feeling better? That migraine sounded brutal." "I'm fine," he said. His own voice sounded alien to him, flat and devoid of warmth. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "Okay, talk about what?" "About us." A flicker of confusion, then hurt, crossed her face. "Us? I didn't know there was an us to talk about." He let out a small, dismissive sigh. "Look, Maya, this has been fun. The late nights in the library, the coffee, all of it. It's been a good distraction." Each word was a measured blow. Fun, distraction. He watched the light in her eyes begin to dim. "A distraction?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "A distraction from what?" "From the semester," he said, shrugging. "It's almost over. Finals are coming up. I just think we should be clear about what this was." Her face was pale now. What this was? "We were lab partners," he said, his voice cold and final. "It was convenient, but I don't want you to get the wrong idea. You were just a semester fling." The words hung in the air between them, ugly and toxic. He watched them hit her. The color drained completely from her face, her eyes filled with a stunned, profound hurt. "A fling," she finally managed to say. She shook her head slowly. No, I don't believe you." "Believe it," he said, forcing a cruel smirk onto his lips. "Why is that so hard to understand? We had some chemistry. We passed the time. It wasn't ever going to be anything more. I'm sorry if you read more into it. That wasn't my intention." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't you dare apologize to me." She looked at him one last time, her expression a mixture of devastation and dawning anger. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. Adrian sat there, frozen. He had done it. He had severed the connection. The noise of the coffee shop rushed back in, loud and meaningless. He felt a cold, familiar presence brush against the edges of his senses from the street outside. Silas had been watching. The performance had been witnessed. Adrian felt only a vast, echoing emptiness. The lie was told, the price was paid, and he was, once again, completely and utterly alone. For 2 weeks, Adrian kept his vigil, a silent, unseen guardian. At night, he would perch on the rooftops overlooking her dormitory. He tracked Silas's scent, deliberately left like breadcrumbs, a psychological game. Silas could mask his presence entirely, but a hunter who hides completely can't watch his prey's reaction to the fear. Silas wanted Adrian to know he was here. For 2 weeks, the scent faded. Adrian allowed himself cautious hope. Then, on a Thursday night, he heard it. Maya's voice, drifting up from the courtyard below where she sat with friends. "I just don't understand," Maya was saying. "Everything felt so real. The way he looked at me in the library, like I was the only person in the world. How do you fake that?" Her friend hugged her. "Forget him. You deserve someone who sees you." And Maya whispered, "He did see me. That's what makes it hurt so much." At that exact moment, a gust of wind swept through. Adrian, his entire being focused on Maya's pain, shifted his position, an instinctive, unconscious micro-movement forward, toward her voice, a protective lean his body made before his mind could stop it. It lasted a fraction of a second. From another rooftop, Silas watched, not Maya, Adrian, and he saw it. That one unconscious movement, the king's body betraying what his mind tried to hide. Silas smiled in the darkness. She still mattered. The breakup was a performance, and now Silas knew exactly how to make the king suffer. For another week, Silas's scent disappeared entirely. The absence was more terrifying than the hints had been. When a predator stops announcing himself, it means he stopped playing and started hunting. That hope was annihilated on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the breakup. Adrian was on his usual rooftop when he heard screams from 3 blocks away. The scent of vampire violence. People were dying. He looked at Maya. She was walking with friends toward her dorm, safe. The screams intensified. He made his decision. He could reach them and return in 90 seconds. He moved. The courtyard was empty when he arrived. No bodies, no blood. Just students playing games on their phones. The scent was staged. Animal blood, not human. A trap. He spun and raced back, but he knew. He was too late. Outside Maya's dorm, he found her phone on the ground, screen cracked, her bag spilled beside it. The scent of her fear was fresh, sharp, terrifying. Mixed with it was Silas. And no trail leading away. He'd gone completely silent. A roar of pure, feral rage built in his chest. The careful construct of Adrian Vance shattered. In his place stood what he truly was. Adrian, the king, ancient and terrible. Find her. He ran, following the fading thread of her terror scent to the old bell tower. He didn't pause at the doors. He placed a hand on the ancient oak and pushed. The wood splintered, the iron lock shearing away. He didn't take the stairs. He leaped, moving from wall to wall in a gravity-defying ascent. He was vengeance. He was death. And he was coming. Maya regained consciousness slowly, rough rope against her wrists, cold stone beneath her cheek. She was in a circular room, high up, the night sky visible through archways. A massive bronze bell hung in the center. Ah, she wakes. The voice was smooth, cultured. The man who had taken her leaned against an archway. I do apologize for the rope. I could have used chains or simply broken your legs, but I needed you conscious and able to run when the time comes. Nothing motivates our dear king quite like prey in motion. Who are you? Maya's voice was raw and trembling. What do you want? My name is Silas, and what I want is to have a conversation with an old acquaintance. You are simply the invitation. He began to circle her slowly. Your Adrian is a king, you see. A king who likes to pretend he is a sheep. But a wolf can always smell another wolf. The way he broke your heart? A masterful performance. He was trying to convince me you were meaningless to him. He almost succeeded. But I have known him for a very long time, and I know he has one fatal flaw. He feels things. And if I was patient, he would lead me right to it. And here you are. The pieces clicked into place. Adrian's strangeness, his old-fashioned speech, the moments of impossible stillness, the deep sadness in his eyes. And the cruelty of their breakup, a performance? To protect her? Before she could process it, a sound from below. A splintering crash, the shriek of metal. Silas smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp. Ah, showtime. You see, I don't need to be stronger than him. I just need your blood on my hands and his hesitation to buy me 3 seconds to tear your throat out. Then I walk away, and he spends eternity, knowing he was too powerful to save you. There were no footsteps, only a sudden drop in temperature. A deeper shadow coalesced in the archway. From that void, 2 eyes opened, glowing with faint red light. The shadow stepped forward into the belfry, resolving into Adrian. But not the gentle scholar. This was something else entirely. He was taller, broader, his presence filling the room with palpable menace. His clothes were torn and streaked with blood. His face was a mask of cold, silent fury. All the humanity she'd ever seen in him was gone, burned away by rage. "Silas," he said, and his voice was a low, guttural growl. "Let her go." Silas laughed. "My king! So good to see you've dropped the pretense. And I will not be letting her go." He pulled a knife. "We are going to watch you break. You cannot kill what you love. Your strength comes from your cold heart. But the moment you care, you hesitate. You become mortal in your mind." Adrian took another step. Maya saw him clearly now. Blood streaked his face, his hands. This was the wolf. This was the king. And he was terrifying. "This is between you and me," Adrian snarled. "It was," Silas said, "until you brought her into it. Until you decided to feel. Now, you will lose both your power and your heart. Watch carefully. I'm going to cut her, slowly, and you're going to have to choose. Save her and let me escape, or kill me and watch her bleed out. Either way, And then Adrian moved. Silas hadn't finished his monologue. He'd been expecting hesitation. Instead, Adrian simply acted. No thought, no strategy, only pure, uncontrolled annihilation. What followed was not a fight. It was an execution. Adrian caught Silas's knife hand with a crack of bone. Silas cried out. Adrian's expression didn't change. He drove his fist into Silas's chest. The impact sent Silas flying backward, smashing through the wall. Wood and plaster exploded. Silas scrambled up, his arm broken, his face now showing fear. "How? You were never this strong." "You threatened what is mine," Adrian growled. The red glow in his eyes intensified. Maya could only watch, paralyzed. This was a battle of gods or demons. The gentle scholar was a myth. The monster was the reality. And that monster was committing impossible violence in her name. Silas lunged desperately. Adrian sidestepped and gripped him by the throat, lifting him off the floor with one hand. "You came to my home," Adrian whispered. "You laid your scent in my territory. And you put your hands on her." He slammed Silas against the great bronze bell. Bong! Again. Bong! And again. Bong! Each impact punctuated by the crunch of bone. Finally, Adrian pulled the broken form close. "You wanted to see me break," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was more terrifying than his rage. "You wanted to see the monster." He smiled, a chilling baring of his teeth. And Maya saw them. Fangs. Long, sharp, pearlescent. "Here I am." He drove his fangs into Silas's neck. There was no passion, no hunger. It was an act of final, absolute destruction. Silas convulsed, then went limp. His body began to crumble, dissolving into gray dust. Adrian let the empty clothes fall. The slaughter was over. The silence was profound. All that remained was the scent of stone, night air, blood, and death. Adrian stood in the center, a statue carved from violence. The rage drained away, leaving something hollowed and fragile. Slowly, he turned to face her. Maya flinched, pressing back against the pillar. He was covered in blood. His eyes, now clear of red, were filled with bottomless agony. He looked at her, and she saw the king, the predator, and the heartbroken scholar all at once. The fangs were still visible. He took a step toward her, and she whimpered. He froze instantly. The pain that flooded his face was devastating. He had saved her life only to become the new source of her terror. With immense control, he lowered himself to his knees on the stone floor. The gesture was complete supplication. He knelt before her, head bowed, 20 feet away. "Maya," he said, his voice broken and raw. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Her mind was a whirlwind of impossible images. His gentle touch in the library, his cruel smirk in the coffee shop, the blur of violence, and now this. The blood-soaked monster kneeling, looking at her with the eyes of a lost soul. "You were just a semester fling," she whispered, the cruelest words he'd ever said. His face crumpled. "It was a lie," he gasped. "Every word was a lie. I saw him watching you. I knew he would use you to get to me. I thought if he believed you meant nothing to me, he would leave you alone. I tried to make you hate me to save you. I ripped my own heart out to protect yours. And I failed." A sob cut off his words. The confession hung between them. It was the key that unlocked everything. The cruelty wasn't rejection, it was protection. The distance wasn't because he didn't care, it was because he cared too much. He had broken her heart and then torn the world apart, all in a desperate, failed attempt to keep her safe. But her mind couldn't process it yet. It was too big, too impossible. She stared at him, at this creature kneeling in blood and ash, and her thoughts began to move, slowly at first, then faster, connecting dots she'd been too blind to see. His hand was always ice cold. Even in the middle of summer, when the library was stuffy and warm, when other students were in shorts and tank tops, his fingers had been like marble when they'd brushed against hers. She'd asked him about it once. "Poor circulation," he'd said with that shy smile. A lie. The way he spoke. It wasn't just formal, it was old. He used phrases that belonged in costume dramas. "Might I borrow your pen? I would be most grateful. If it pleases you." She'd thought it was charming, quirky. It was because he'd learned English centuries ago. The coffee. He always ordered coffee during their study sessions, black. But she'd never once seen him drink more than a sip. He'd hold the cup, letting the steam warm his hands, but the level never went down. She'd teased him about it. "Not a coffee person?" "It's more about the ritual," he'd said. Because he couldn't eat, couldn't drink, didn't need to. The manuscripts. The way he looked at them wasn't like someone studying history. It was like someone remembering. That faraway look in his eyes when he touched the ancient vellum, the softness in his voice when he talked about the scribes. Brother Benedict had a terrible sense of humor. Silas had said Adrian would know these things. And he did. Because he'd been there. The night she'd touched his wrist in the library, concerned because his skin was so cold. The way he'd flinched back as if her warmth had burned him. The look of longing and pain that had crossed his face before he'd carefully, gently, pulled away. "I'm fine," he'd said, "just tired." Because her human warmth, her living heat, was painful to something dead and cold. Every strange moment, every odd detail, every little inconsistency she'd rationalized away, they all reorganized themselves into a new pattern. A pattern that was impossible. A pattern that made terrible, perfect sense. "How long?" she heard herself ask, her voice hollow and distant. He looked up at her, confused, hope and fear warring in his ancient eyes. "How long what? How long have you been—" She couldn't say it, couldn't say the word. It was too absurd, too impossible. But he understood. He closed his eyes, and she saw shame and resignation wash over his features. 743 years. The number hit her like a physical blow. 700 years. He had been alive. No, not alive. Something else. When knights wore armor and castles dotted Europe. When the printing press hadn't been invented. When the Americas were unknown to the old world. He was older than countries. Older than languages she spoke. 700 years of existence, and he'd spent his semester in a library with her, pretending to be a graduate student, pretending to discover things he'd witnessed firsthand. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh. Instead, it made her want to cry. And Silas, she managed. An old enemy, from the wars that consolidated my reign 5 centuries ago. He's been hunting me, and when he saw that his voice broke. When he saw that I cared about you, he knew he'd found my weakness. The breakup, the cruelty, the dismissive words that had shattered her. All of it had been an act. A desperate, brutal attempt to save her by making her meaningless. And it had failed. She should run. Every human instinct screamed at her to run. She'd just watched him kill someone, with his bare hands. Had watched him move with impossible speed, impossible strength. Had seen his eyes glow red with rage. Had seen the fangs that were still visible, still stained with black blood. She should be running. But she couldn't, because she kept circling back to one thing. He was still kneeling. This creature who could topple empires, who had just torn another immortal apart like paper, who radiated power and ancient authority. He was on his knees in the dust, 20 feet away, his head bowed, waiting for her judgment. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the violence had ended. Past the blood, past the fangs, past the impossible revelation of what he was. She saw the way he held himself carefully still, non-threatening despite the power coiled in his frame. She saw the tremble in his hands, which he'd laid palm up on his thighs, open, empty, surrendering. She saw the tears cutting clean tracks through the blood and grime on his face. She saw the absolute, devastating vulnerability in eyes that had witnessed 7 centuries of human history. He was offering her his life. If she told him to leave, he would vanish and she'd never see him again. If she screamed, if she ran, if she rejected him, he would accept it as his earned punishment. This being who could move faster than her eyes could track, who could hear her heartbeat from across campus, who could kill with casual ease, he had placed himself completely and utterly at her mercy. That's what made her move. Not the explanation, not the revelation of the protective lie, but the choice he was giving her, the absolute power he was placing in her trembling, human hands. Her legs were shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her, but she made them work. 1 foot forward. The dust of Silas's remains, because that's what the gray powder was, she realized with a lurch of her stomach, the cremated remnants of a vampire, crunched softly under her shoes. Another step, and another. The distance between them closed, and she watched him tense, watched his eyes squeeze shut as if he couldn't bear to watch her approach, couldn't bear to hope. She stopped directly in front of him. Up close, she could see details she'd never noticed before, or had noticed and rationalized away. The complete stillness of his chest. He wasn't breathing. The preternatural smoothness of his skin, like porcelain, unmarred by any scar or blemish, despite 700 years of existence. The way the moonlight seemed to catch on his features strangely, making him look almost luminous, inhuman. But also, the same man who had spent 3 hours helping her decipher a single corrupted word in a Latin text, not because it was important to their project, but because she'd wanted to understand it correctly. Who had brought her tea, unprompted, made exactly the way she liked it, on the nights when she'd been stressed about exams. Who had looked at her across the library table like she'd personally invented light. Monster and man. Both true. Both him. Slowly, her hand shaking so violently she could barely control it, she reached out. Not for his face, not for comfort or reassurance. For verification. For the truth she still couldn't quite believe. Her fingers moved toward his mouth, toward the fangs that were still partially visible between his blood-stained lips. Maya, don't. His voice was raw with panic. You don't have to. But she did. She had to know. Had to confirm that this was real, that the world had truly shifted this far from everything she'd believed possible. Her fingertips, trembling, touched his lower lip. The skin was cold, smooth. Real. She felt him freeze completely under her touch, felt him stop even the pretense of breathing, as if her acceptance or rejection in this moment would determine the course of his immortal existence. Gently, carefully, she traced upward until her fingertip rested against the point of one fang. It was smooth as glass and sharp as a surgical blade, hard as diamond. Real. Not a prosthetic, not a trick, not a shared delusion born of trauma. Real. A weapon designed by nature, or by something beyond nature, to kill, to pierce, to drain. A predator's tool. She should be terrified, and she was, but she was also strangely, impossibly calm, because this fang, this weapon, this proof of the monster, it was also just a part of him, like his cold hands, like his ancient eyes, like his formal speech and his impossible knowledge. It was a part of the being who had loved her enough to break both their hearts trying to save her. She felt a tremor run through his entire body at her touch, a shuddering breath he didn't need but took anyway, as if her acceptance was oxygen to a drowning man. And then, shocking her, he pulled back slightly, dislodging her finger from his fang. His eyes opened, meeting hers, and they were filled with something raw and painful. You should be afraid of me, he whispered. You should run. You should... I am afraid, she interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm terrified. Of what you are, of what you can do, of what I just watched you do. His face crumpled, as if her fear was a blade twisting in his chest, but she wasn't finished. But I'm also angry, she continued. Angry that you made that choice for me, that you decided breaking my heart was better than trusting me with the truth, that you thought you could protect me by destroying me. Her voice shook with emotion. Do you have any idea what these last 3 weeks have been like? Do you know what it's like to question every moment, every smile, every touch, wondering if any of it was real? It was real, he said desperately. Every moment was real. The feelings were real. Only the ending was a lie. Then don't lie to me again, she said. Don't ever make decisions about my safety, my life, my heart without me. I'm not a porcelain doll to be protected. I'm a person, and I get to choose what risks I take. Do you understand? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Say it, she demanded. I understand, he rasped. No more lies. No more decisions made without you. I swear it. She held his gaze. For a long moment, making sure he understood the weight of what he was promising. Then, slowly, she let her hand fall away from his fangs and cupped his jaw instead. His skin was cold under her palm, streaked with drying blood. He leaned into her touch like a man dying of thirst offered water, his eyes closing, his entire being focused on the warmth of her hand against his face. Just don't leave me again, she whispered. The sob that broke from him was raw and utterly human, a sound of disbelief and overwhelming relief and joy so profound it bordered on pain. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just knelt there, his face pressed into her hand, his shoulders shaking with emotion he had no right to feel but couldn't contain. The ancient, blood-soaked king, brought to his knees by a single, fragile, mortal touch. She stood there, her hand on his face, her own emotions a tangled knot she couldn't begin to untangle. Terror and love and anger and choice, all wound together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. She was choosing this, eyes open, knowing the monster, knowing the danger, knowing that her life had just become something impossible. She was choosing him anyway. The city lights glittered below them through the archways, indifferent to the impossible scene in the bell tower. The world continued its rotation, uncaring. But for them, in that moment, everything had changed. Everything had been destroyed and rebuilt in the space of a single night. And when he finally stood, slowly, carefully, still not daring to touch her without permission, she held out her hand. He stared at it like it was salvation itself, like he couldn't believe she was offering it. Then, reverently, carefully, he took it. His hand was cold. She'd always known that. Now she knew why. "Come on," she said quietly, her voice still shaking but determined. "We need to get out of here, and you need to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more lies." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Together, they walked toward the stairs, hand in hand. A vampire king and the human woman who had chosen him. Behind them, the dust of his enemy scattered in the wind. Ahead of them, an impossible future stretched out, full of questions and dangers she couldn't begin to imagine. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. She had chosen, and he had been chosen. After 743 years of solitude, he was no longer alone.